Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Given that it's been almost 2 years since the government and Adelaide Capital Partners signed the Gillman land deal, why hasn't ACP paid the government for any of the land?
Deputy Premier.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. We did canvass some of this stuff yesterday, but the situation with the arrangements with ACP is that there was, in effect, an options deed granted to ACP, and under that there was an obligation on the government as part of that, once the initial option had been exercised, which it has been by ACP, for the government to go forward and to undertake certain works in respect of the development, which included, amongst other things, a zoning exercise. Those works have been completed, and there are now obligations under the agreement upon the proponents of the agreement, ACP, to move forward expeditiously and in good faith with the bits and pieces that they have to attend to. It's my expectation that they will get on with it, and as soon as those additional steps have been undertaken by them, it would be my expectation that there would be a settlement as contemplated in the agreement. Now, as I explained yesterday, in my view, that should be possible in the not-too-distant future, but I made it clear to the Parliament yesterday that it's not appropriate for me to put a particular date on it, because I would be misleading the Parliament, because I would be saying something about a particular point in time wherein we expected that to happen, and I'm not able to be that specific about that point in time, other than, as far as I'm concerned, the government part of the obligations have now been discharged, and it's a matter for them to get on with discharging theirs.
Before the Leader asks the supplementary, I acknowledge today in the gallery the long-serving and distinguished former member for Torrens, Robin Geraghty. Leader.
Thank you very much. Supplementary to the Deputy Premier. Can the Deputy Premier outline to the Parliament what those things are that ACP should be getting on with actually are?
Yes, look, I will get the detail of that for you, because I don't want to give you an answer which is then misleading because it hasn't covered each and every element. But essentially they have to be getting on with the preparation of the land so that it can actually be capable of being subdivided and therefore made available for sale, essentially. But I will check to make sure that I haven't missed any step, but I'm talking about it in general terms. That's what they have to get on and do.
Supplementary, Leader.
Is that a physical transformation or preparation of the land, or just in terms of the overall planning?
Again, I will check, but my understanding is it is a process rather than a physical piece of work on the land, a legal and procedural process.
Supplementary, sir. Has ACP paid any landholding costs, such as land tax, during the period that this land has been locked up but not paid for?
Look, again, I will check, Mr Speaker, but as I understand it, the normal rules are that the person on the title of any particular piece of land is the person who's responsible for any taxes attached to that piece of land. So I would assume that as that continues to be in government hands for the time being, that the answer to that question is no, but I will check it.
Thank you. What remedies does the contract provide if ACP doesn't get on with it, as the Deputy Premier has suggested in the Parliament today?
Yes, well, again, as I tried to explain yesterday, there's with commercial contracts of this nature, which are quite large and quite complex, there's a number of different ways that they can be drafted up, which is up to the parties and the lawyers concerned. But in broad terms, one approach is to say, and this is the approach that we have here, is to say that there are certain milestones that are meant to be achieved as expeditiously as possible, with the parties acting in good faith. In the event of there being a dispute between the parties, and a dispute might be, for instance, that one party believes another has been slow or not fully engaged in part of its responsibilities, the contracts, the agreement, have within them terms in relation to dispute resolution. And so the agreement itself, Mr Speaker, contains its own dispute resolution provisions, and in the event of there being, as was put forward by the leader, a lack of performance by either party, the first recourse they would have would be to the dispute resolution procedures provided for within the agreement.
Can the Deputy Premier outline to the Parliament what those dispute resolution procedures are?
Well, essentially they involve an arbitration of the disputed or contended propositions. Without having the agreement in front of me, I can't tell you the precise steps, but in general terms it involves the parties in effect having an arbitrator come in to sort out their differences.
Given the fact that this deal is almost 2 years down the track and there hasn't been settlement, at what point will the government issue proceedings for arbitration over the matter of the Gilman land?
Deputy Premier.
Well, we would be in a position to consider those matters when we came to the conclusion, if we came to the conclusion that there had been a lack of performance. But I have to say, Mr Speaker, that that is, as in many matters of this type, a matter of fact and degree, and I don't think it would be appropriate or beneficial from anyone's point of view for me to speculate in any detail about what a triggering event might be, but I would of course be guided by my legal advice.
Just for confirmation, all the conditions precedent that were in the contract for the government to perform prior to settlement have been completed. All of those obligations have been discharged?
Again, that is my understanding of the matter. I can ask those who advise me again, but my understanding is that upon the completion of the zoning exercise, which was completed some months back now, the remaining elements of the transaction that were required to be performed by the state have been complied with. So we are now in the next phase, and in that phase there are things that have to be done by ACP.
Leader.
Finally, sir, does the delay in settlement of the first section of the Gilman land deal affect the publicly disclosed end date for the totality of the Gilman deal?
I'm not exactly sure what the leader means by that. You see, the Gilman. I see, but there are actually just to make it clear, there are actually three stages to this. So I would need to have a look at the provisions in particular with respect to the second and third stages, because whilst it may be that there are maximum periods that those opportunities remain open, again, without checking, I can't say for sure, but it's my understanding there are no minimum periods. So, well, I'd have to get advice on that.
Deputy Leader.
Read it. My question is also the Minister for Planning. Has the Minister now checked whether any member of Adelaide Capital Partners tried to access part or all of the land subject to the Gilman land deal in the years leading up to the deal being signed?
Deputy Premier.
After we had some questions yesterday, I indicated to renewal staff that it would be helpful if they were to look carefully at the Deputy Leader's series of questions and to do their best to get me some answers to those questions. I have yet to receive that response.
Have they given any indication, Minister, have they given any indication as to how long they expect to be before they'll give you some answers so that you can inform the parliament on both that issue and the other matters, including the offering to sell to the state government the right to fill?
No, they have not. I simply, as I said yesterday, said, look, the Deputy Leader has asked me a number of questions in the Parliament about this transaction, and you'll find those questions in Hansard, and I'd like you to go away and see if you can find the answers to those. So that's what I've done.
Deputy Leader.
Given the nature and extent of this Gilman land deal and the controversy of which surrounded it, did you think that it was reasonable to put any expectation on Renewal SA to undertake that search and response expeditiously?
Deputy Premier.
Well, look, I believe that they will be exercising due diligence in going away and doing that. They have many things to do aside from things that I might ask them to do on an afternoon after question time, but I'm confident that they, having been requested by me to do so and having been directed by me to the Hansard, will do that in as reasonable a time as they possibly can.
Leader.
Very much. My question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer table the minute that was received from Mr Michael Buchan on the 21st of November 2013 advising the Minister that the Board of Renewal SA had rejected the Gilman land deal?
Deputy Premier.
Look, all of the material relevant to this transaction has been provided for either through the proceedings in the Supreme Court, which commenced with Mr Justice Blue and then went to a full court, or through the Auditor-General's inquiries, or more recently through the work of Commissioner Lander acting under the provisions of the Ombudsman's Act.
Leader.
Indeed, it was referenced in both the ICAC report and in the Supreme Court judgment, but nevertheless, when the opposition put in a request under FOI for this minute, that wasn't forthcoming. Can it now be tabled?
Well, if it wasn't forthcoming under FOI, that would suggest to me that there is a reason within the FOI legislation that would suggest to me that there is some reason why that document is not a document to which that legislation has application. But if the Leader believes that they got that wrong, then obviously there are avenues, including going to the Ombudsman and saying we don't believe they got that right.
I call to order the members for Morialta and Carvel. Leader.
Well, in fact, the response that came from the department was that it just simply wasn't identified. Yet, of course, now we have both the Supreme Court.
Could we have a question?
Yes. Can the Minister confirm that this document does exist and it will now be tabled by the government?
Well, look, I'm not going to give any undertaking in respect of an unnamed.
I call the Leader to order.
I'm not going to be giving an undertaking in respect of an unnamed document of an alleged particular date. What I would say, though, is that armed with the additional information that the Leader has by reason of the two references to which he's just referred, I could recommend that he either make a renewed application under the FOI Act, or alternatively, if there's been well, it's a matter for the statutory office holders to deal with the matter in the time provided. But, or in the alternative, if he believes that there has been a failure, as I said, I'm just trying to be helpful, or if the Leader, if the Leader believes there's been an error in the way in which the legislation has been applied, then of course he has an opportunity to pursue that through the channels provided under the Act.
I warn the Leader, Deputy Leader.
As the first law officer of the state, surely the Attorney-General would consider inquiring into the department as to why this minute hasn't been produced under FOI, or the requisite notice given as to why it is not going to be produced on the basis of protection.
That's
under the
really
Act.
an expression of opinion rather than a
No, I asked
question.
him why he wouldn't do it.
Yes, there was that. Deputy
yes.
Premier.
Mr Speaker, Shirley, no, don't call me Shirley. But in addition to that, the situation is that I don't, off the top of my head, have any particular idea what minute these questions are actually concerning. I don't know what department, although I assume it might have something to do with State Development or Treasury, or maybe not. Maybe it's in renewal. I don't know. And all I'm saying is that I will continue to advise members of the opposition, if they're interested in this matter, if they're interested, by all means put in an application. I have no reason...
And the question wasn't identified. And it turns up in the ICAC Commission's report, and it turns up in the Supreme Court judgment.
And
your department said it doesn't even exist.
The leader is warned for the second and the final time.
I'm simply saying that if the leader now has 2 points of reference which might be of assistance to the FOI officer in ascertaining exactly what it is the leader is looking for, I would invite the leader to make the application.
The member for Schubert is called to order, warned a first time and warned a second time, and the members for Mount Gambier, the Deputy Leader and the member for Wright are called to order. Leader.
Thank you. My question is to the Treasurer. Why didn't the Treasurer pass on the renewal SA minute recommending the rejection of the ACP Gilman bid to the Premier on the 4th of July 2013?
Deputy Premier.
Yes, but Mr Speaker, all of these issues have been canvassed at length in the various proceedings to which I have already referred, and there is nothing really more to add to what is contained in those reports.
Supplementary. Is the reason that the Treasurer didn't pass on that minute to the Premier is that he didn't agree with the advice that had been provided by Renewal SA?
Deputy Premier.
For the sake of brevity, can I just repeat my last answer?
Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. Does the Treasurer accept that as the Minister responsible, it was his ultimate responsibility to ensure probity with the ACP Gilman deal?
Treasurer. Premier.
Well, I've already accepted. I've already accepted. Well, I was Minister for State Development. In fact, I was Treasurer at the time and Minister for State Development, and I've already accepted responsibility for this agreement, and I stand by it. If those opposite have not heard the explanation before, I'm happy to give it again. We take responsibility for the decisions that we took to enter into this arrangement, to take a piece of land that was laying there for 30 years and actually accept an unsolicited bid from a group of entrepreneurs that wanted to create jobs for the benefit of South Australians. That was the simple and entire motivation of the exercise, and it was the simple and entire explanation that's been accepted by every process that's been conducted into this matter. Every process that has been undertaken in relation to this matter. Our purpose has been vindicated in every single process. Despite the innuendo and the snide references and But having said that, sir, there were elements of the process where
If the leader utters another word outside standing orders, he will be departing the chamber.
There were elements of the process which weren't up to standard, and they've been documented in the Ombudsman's report exercised by Commissioner Lander, and they're important. They're important. Well, the ICAC Commissioner behaving.
The member for Unley is called to order, and the member for Mount Gambier is warned.
You see, we were the ones that set up the Independent Commissioner Against Corruption, and we did that. We did that. We did that because we wanted to send a very clear message to the people of South Australia that the decisions we take are decisions that are taken with the highest of integrity. And the purpose that we undertook this exercise for was confirmed as a proper purpose. And it would be good if those opposite gave this arrangement an opportunity to succeed. Because I think everybody accepts that we need high quality infrastructure that creates opportunity for employment growth here in South Australia. But it is true, Mr Speaker, that there were some significant failings that were identified in the Ombudsman's report. You'll also see that he outlines all of the steps the government has taken to respond to those matters and remedy them, and he cites them with approval. So in other words, the deficiencies have been responded to and remedied, and Commissioner Lander acknowledges that they were proper steps to be taken. He mentions one further matter. Which is the governance arrangements for the in relation to Renewal SA, and that matter was a subject of a question yesterday in fact in the Auditor General's report, and I think maybe even the Deputy Premier would have received some questions about that, and that is receiving our attention. We are attending to that matter as well. But I take responsibility for this transaction. I promoted it, I supported it. Sure, there were some deficiencies in the way in which the agency conducted itself, but at all times we never sought to hide behind the board or any of the advice of the agency. We always own this as a decision of the government in the interests of the people of South Australia.
Before the Deputy Leader asks her question, I call to order the members for Finnis, Chafee and Morphett. I warn for the first time the members for Morialta, Carvel, Morphett and indeed the Deputy Leader herself. And I warn for the second and final time the member for Carvel. Deputy Leader.
My question is to the Premier. Given that the Premier has accepted ultimate responsibility to ensure the probity arrangements in relation to the deal, why didn't he then ensure that a probity advisor was appointed prior to the negotiations commencing with ACP?
This has all been canvassed at length in the report. What in fact happened is that once the transaction, the actual negotiations for the transaction were undertaken in earnest, that's when the probity auditor was appointed. Now, well, that actually happens to be...
The Leader is warned for the second and final time.
That happens to be the truth. Unfortunately, the probity auditor should have been appointed at an earlier time. And that's the criticism, not that there was not a probity auditor appointed, or even that the probity auditor was not appointed before the negotiations in earnest began. It's just that it should have been at an earlier time. That was proper process. It was not something I was aware of. I think we were entitled to assume that our agency was taking all relevant steps. It didn't, and that's unfortunate, and I have to accept, and the Minister has to accept responsibility for that, and we do. But it needs to be seen in this context. There was a probity auditor appointed. It just was the timing of the probity auditor's appointment. Of course, this criticism emerged in the Auditor General's report.
Deputy Leader is living dangerously.
This is old news. This was a criticism made by the Auditor General, which we accepted at that time. It's simply been one repeated by Commissioner Lander in his later report.
Member for Morialta is warned for the second and final time. Deputy Leader.
A question to the Treasurer. Does the Treasurer agree with the Independent Commissioner Against Corruption's finding that the eventual appointment of the probity advisors amounted to an attempt to ensure that it would be perceived that the URA had conducted itself appropriately in the process, but no more?
Premier.
Well, we've already indicated we accept all of the findings, good and bad, that have been made by Commissioner Lander. So, of course, we accept all the findings. We've made that publicly. That's the position of the government in relation to the findings. We're taking them seriously and we're seeking to respond to the criticisms. But those opposites should also acknowledge those elements of the report which are beneficial to the government and which do not amount to criticisms of either the minister or myself. The member asked the question seeking to cast some blame or criticism on the Treasurer or indeed myself, but that goes further than the findings that were made by the Commissioner. Now, I understand why the opposition would want to conduct its own inquiry and make its own findings, but fortunately we're relying upon an independent Commissioner who is well respected, and if he hasn't chosen to make those criticisms of the Treasurer, I don't think it's really within the province of the Deputy Leader to add her own gloss, if you like, on the report.
Leader.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Premier. How can the Premier substantiate his suggestion that there was no other prospect for the development of the Gilman site which would have created jobs when the Commissioner references the Land Management Corporation's announcement that the land would be put to tender and that other parties had already put forward a proposal for a joint venture to develop part of the site?
Premier.
Well, we're not interested in somebody using the site as a dump. We want it to be developed for employment lands. That's our ambition for the site, and I'm sure that there are people that want to use the site for their private economic benefit. What we're interested in is the public interest and the public benefit, and so that's the reason we took the stance that we did. And sure, it is unusual to entertain an unsolicited bid in this fashion, and you only do it in exceptional cases where the benefit is a high benefit. And also, the other factor here is, of course, we were worried about losing the opportunity. This is an extraordinary proposition. Somebody's going to spend $200 million of their money making our land more valuable. That is something you want to look at. That is something you want to give a chance to actually work. We're not as interested in somebody using our land as a dump. I think we're entitled to take a view about that, which we did. And that is at the heart of the matter.
The member for Mount Gambier is warned for the second and final time, and the member for Chaffey is warned. Leader.
Supplementary, sir. Will the Premier guarantee ACP will not use this site to deposit landfill?
Premier.
No, I won't be giving any guarantees of the sort. In fact, the evidence that's been given to the inquiry is replete with the fact that that's in part what they'll be doing as part of their business case. It also indicates that they'll be needing to use land to fill the site up to the extraordinary level that needs to be filled at to make it usable. There will need to be sources of land taken from a range of different sources, many different sources, to actually build it up so that it's able to be used for its ultimate purpose as employment land. So I'm certainly not giving any guarantees of any sort about the nature of the way in which they're going to do that.
Call to order the member for Hammond, Leader.
Far from it being that you wouldn't rule it out, is it not actually included in the contract that this land can be used as a site for fill to be deposited?
All of these matters have been canvassed at length in Commissioner Lander's report. And look, I mean, maybe we just have to accept that we've got a different vision for this site. You want to use it as a dump, we want to turn it into employment lands. I mean, maybe they're the two visions we put in front of the people of South Africa. Or more importantly, maybe the future is that it should just lay there doing nothing for 30 years. Much like the Liberal Party of South Australia. Empty, barren, nothing happening here, no ideas.
Leader.
Thank you very much, sir. Can the Premier outline to the House what evidence he relied upon to determine that the other proposals, the proposals that the Land Management Corporation referred to, would not create the same number of jobs that the ACP proposal purported to create for South Australia?
Premier.
Well, Mr Speaker, this has all been laid out at length. Every element of the decision-making process that we took as a Cabinet has been laid bare in 3 separate processes, and there's been nothing to suggest that our motivations weren't exactly as we said. That is the creation of employment lands, the evidence that's been given. I mean, I do hope that they're successful in achieving this. We have doubts now, given the controversy around this process. We do hope that they're successful, but their ambitions...
Unley is warned.
Their ambitions for this site are extensive and about creating the estimated 6,000 jobs. It would be a wonderful thing if that could be created in a logistics hub so close to the city.
Member for Hammond is warned.
They're certainly the things that we hope become a reality.
Leader.
If the Premier is telling the Parliament today that it was envisaged by the government that the site would need to be filled, then why wasn't the increased valuation for that site from being able to receive that fill material included in the evaluation undertaken by his department?
These are all matters that were... Yeah,
They
have indeed.
The leader is on the edge.
And indeed there are valuation. I mean, when there's a valuation undertaking of a piece of land, it takes into account all the relevant circumstances. Now, I think we're entitled as a government to rely upon our expert land disposal body to provide us with expert advice about what the value of a piece of land is. You would have thought that as a government we're entitled to go to our land disposal body for land that it actually holds and say and jeopardise the possibility of getting an investment of hundreds of millions of dollars and the creation of many jobs. And they were simply the choices in front of this government. Now, we're not going to apologise for... We're not going to apologise for taking...
The Treasurer is called to order and the member for Colton is called to order for unsolicited advice to the Speaker.
We're not going to apologise for taking a course which puts the creation of jobs ahead of other considerations. And I think we were within our rights to rely upon the advice of Renewal SA, and there's been no criticism of the fact that we did that. What there has been criticism of is the way in which Renewal SA went about securing up-to-date valuations, although it's also worth saying there's never been a suggestion in any of the reports, despite doubts being cast on the valuations, that there is a valuation of the land which is any higher than that which we've got. And there is, and to take that further, the
once
price,
more, and the Deputy Leader will be out again.
The price, the valuation is so the valuation that does exist on the public record is so low compared with the price we actually received, and there's nothing to suggest in the intervening period that land prices skyrocketed. There's really nothing to suggest that we got anything other than a good value. There certainly is no alternative valuation, and even to this day, nobody's been able to produce a valuation to suggest that there was going to be a higher value. But that was not the motivation of the government. That was not the motivation of the government. It was seeking to extract the maximum value for this land. That was a pleasant side benefit. We wanted essentially to create jobs in this important part of South Australia.
The member for Davenport is called to order, the member for Finnis is warned, and the member for Morford is warned a second and final time. Leader.
Thank you very much, sir. Did the government receive any advice that the unique fill opportunities on the Gilman land would present to the state a unique valuation opportunity?
Premier.
Well, I can hear the thwack of lever on the rear end of a horse here. This is flogging a rather dead horse. I mean, it has been... We have been asked the same questions and given the same answers since before the last state election. I've been saying exactly the same thing for a couple of years now, and there's no inquiry that's found other than what I've been saying is a proper answer. I repeat what I said earlier about the fact the government is entitled to rely upon its expert agencies to provide it with its valuations, and also probably the more important fact that it was jobs that was at the centre of our considerations, not seeking to get the highest value for the land in question.
I call the member for Goyder to order. Leader.
Nevertheless, did the government receive any advice that the fill opportunities at Gilman create increased value for that land over and above its unencumbered, non-filled opportunities?
I'm not going to canvass all of the observations that were made by Commissioner Lander in his report. He sets that out chapter and verse about what the government was told and not told, and the criticisms he made of Renewal SA about their steps to gain further information to assist in that valuation exercise. Now, we can go round and round in circles and ask this question about what the valuation was and whether it was up to date and whether it could have taken into account different considerations. But Renewal SA was holding a valuation. It sought to update that valuation and it provided advice to government concerning the valuation, advice that we took into account. I don't think there's anything more I can add.
Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question to the Minister for Housing and Urban Development. Has Incitec Pivot been offered a site within the land subject to the ACP deal to relocate their enterprise, and if so, has it been accepted?
Deputy Premier.
I will need to check on the details of that, but it is the case that Incitec Pivot has been occupying a site very close to an area of the Port Adelaide inner harbour that we have long had the ambition to enliven with activity and to be part of a renewal of the whole of the Port Adelaide precinct. So, and of course, in the presence of that particular activity adjacent to that doesn't really go well together, because as members would be possibly aware, the chemicals that they have require some degree of a buffer, a precinct around which there should be certainly no housing development. And yes, there have been talks about Incitec Pivot at some point leaving their present premises, thereby enabling opportunities to occur in the inner harbour, and moving to adjacent premises or nearby premises, but not immediately adjacent premises. So, as to exactly where that discussion is up to, I'm not going to guess. But in general terms, there has been conversation about them moving, and my recollection is that the idea was that there was some opportunity for some land to be made available in that sort of North Arm area, but to get the precise answer to the particular question, I'll need to take the rest of that on notice.
Deputy Leader.
So when making that inquiry, Minister, could you inquire as to when it is likely to be relocated, given that the member for Port Adelaide promised this would occur by June 2013?
Premier.
I'd be delighted to make that inquiry. I don't know exactly what, whether we're talking about the current member for Port Adelaide or a previous member for Port Adelaide or the current one. Right, I see. Okay. Yeah. Look, yes, I will find out about that, but exactly, and I will ask the Minister in due course what in fact she did say, if anything, in that point in time, so I can actually give an answer to the question about what the Minister actually said.
Member for Unley is warned for the second and final time.
Final supplementary. Minister, was the relocation of Incitec Pivot to the Gilman area part of the government's agreement to purchase the Incitec's existing site at Port Adelaide?
Again, I would have to check whether or not there is any formal arrangement there, but my recollection of the whole proposition is, as I've already indicated to the Parliament, the storage of certain materials in that precinct is anathema to a commercial and residential development in that precinct adjacent to in effect, a warehouse for particular chemicals, which it was. And so, of course, there were discussions with Incitec Pivot about how we might achieve the benefit of having a large area of the port that would otherwise have been, in effect, sterilised for any sort of reasonable development to become available at some point in time for appropriate development. Now, and obviously there were conversations with them, and there, as I've already said, my recollection is there was some opportunity made available for them to have a relocation option in the general vicinity. But if you're wanting to fine grain on that, well, obviously I'll have to get the fine grain from. I would need to look at whatever documents are involved and seek advice on that.
Deputy
I have
Leader.
a further supplementary, sir. Have there been any discussions between the government and ACP about Incitec Pivot being a tenant at Gilman?
Not that I'm aware of, but again, I will ask. But I think the Deputy Leader is assuming that these two events are somehow coupled. They are events with their own beginnings and their own sort of trajectories, and that the two are not interdependent as far as I'm concerned in any way.
The Deputy Leader has defied my ruling by continuing to interject. No, I haven't thrown her out yet. Oh. Thank you for volunteering. I'll bear that in mind. The member for Morphett.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Health. Will the Minister rule out SA Health or the SA Ambulance Service contracting out inter-hospital transfer of patients?
Well, look, I need to get some advice from the department. I think it's probably unlikely. I think my recollection is that inter-hospital transfers that are done by the SA Ambulance Service are normally done not by full paramedics but by people with a lower level of qualification. But I'll need to check, but to my knowledge I don't think there's any plans to do that.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary.
Can the Minister then tell us where the 170,000 outpatients who visit the REPAT will be transferred to?
Well, they will be seen at most of them will be seen either at the Flinders Medical Centre, or we're looking at the option of availing ourselves of the Marion GP Plus as the two locations for those outpatient appointments that currently happen in the REPAT to occur.
Member for Morialta.
Sir, my question is to the Minister for Police. Will the government engage with the non-government sector with a view to enabling non-government organisations in the family and domestic violence space to formally engage with the new MAPS framework?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for his question. As the honourable member would be aware, that the MAPS project is subject to a review at the moment. That review, I understand, has been prepared in draft form. I haven't seen the report yet, but it's been going to the steering committee, which oversights the project. I'm not aware whether that's a recommendation or not. It may be a recommendation, but certainly I'm happy to have those discussions in conjunction with the what the report recommends.
Member for Morialta.
Given that I understand that review is due to be provided in its final form on the 10th of November, will the Minister commit to tabling that review in the Parliament for the people of South Australia and the Parliament to consider in the subsequent sitting week?
Minister. Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when I received the report, and should I table it, the very first question I'll probably get from the Minister, from the member for Morialta, is what is my response to the recommendations. So I'll preempt that and say that I'll have a look at the report and prepare some responses and table both the report and the government's responses.
Member for Morialta.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Police. Which police stations is the government considering for cutbacks and reduced opening hours, as suggested by the Police Commissioner yesterday?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. As the member would be aware, that the review, Operation Review, which has been published by the Commissioner, he's actually now in the consultation process. I'm sure he will deal it as an operational matter and he'll publish a final version in due course.
Supplementary.
And for Morialto.
Why didn't the government indicate during the estimates process, when asked about whether there would be any further police station closures in addition to the 8 police stations the government has closed this year, that further cutbacks were being considered as well?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I've said a number of thank the honourable member for a question. As I've said on a number of occasions, those matters are an operational matter. The ones which were dealt with at estimates were the ones which came to my advice. Those matters are still being discussed at an operational within police. So there's no advice to me on that. Which station?
Supplementary.
And for Morialto.
If the minister is to continue to insist, as he has just done, that all of these matters to do with police station closures are operational matters, will the minister commit the Labor Party to no longer using former government's closure of police stations, or indeed this government's opening of those police stations, in those publicity materials for elections, such as those police stations this government claimed credit for opening which have subsequently been shut?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. No.
The member for Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Small Business. Can the Minister please inform the House what the South Australian Government is doing for start-ups and entrepreneurs?
Treasurer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for her question. Entrepreneurship underpins our state's efforts to become a more innovative and globally competitive, and helps create sustainable jobs in high-value, globally competitive markets. This government is strongly committed to creating a business environment where start-ups can succeed and where established businesses can grow. To that end, we're working to reduce costs for all South Australian businesses and to build the capability of business owners and managers to grow globally competitive, profitable businesses and create jobs. We're implementing the most significant reforms in work cover in a generation, and the new Return to Work scheme is expected to save businesses an estimated $180 million per annum in premiums. On top of this, Mr. Speaker, this government is embarking on the most comprehensive state tax reform in South Australia's history. And at the centrepiece of that reform package are jobs. Now, every single business and enterprise in South Australia, whether big or small, can benefit from these changes, Mr. Speaker. And the government's tax reform stands our state and our party alone in the nation for tax reform. We're committed to red tape reduction and better engagement with the industry through the work of the Simpler Regulation Unit. And the state government, through our jobs plan, is investing in various programs aimed at realising the economic potential of the state's entrepreneurs. Now, Mr. Speaker, the government is providing $1.7 million over 3 years to the SA Microfinance Fund, which provides grants of up to $50,000 for South Australian entrepreneurs to turn their new ideas into high-value businesses. The government is providing $1.05 million over 3 years to InnovizStart to deliver a mentorship-based startup accelerator program, and I'm advised that graduates of its accelerator programs have so far raised more than $2.95 million in leveraged investment. The government is providing also $450,000 over 3 years to support Venture Catalyst. It's an initiative of the state government and the University of South Australia, and the program encourages entrepreneurship and the creation of local startups by providing funding for early-stage ventures founded by the University of South Australia's students and recent graduates. To date, 4 local startups have received $50,000 each in seed funding. Now, the government is providing $400,000 over 4 years to Margarine, a city-based co-working space that provides mentorship and industry connections for budding entrepreneurs. This program also delivers the government's Entrepreneurship Masterclass Mega, along with Open Data Event, Unleashed and South Start conferences, which bring together around 600 entrepreneurs from Australia and beyond. And over the past 2 years, the government has committed $40,000 per year to support the SA Young Entrepreneurs Scheme, a program delivered through Business SA that assists young professionals to develop and start a business. And together with these measures and support of the establishment, growth and success of the next generation of innovative South Australian businesses working in a jurisdiction that will become the lowest taxed jurisdiction in the Federation of all the states, something we can all be very, very proud of.
Supplementary.
Can the
Leader.
Treasurer outline to the House why, after
Leader.
14 years of
4 times.
Labor administration and all the programs that he's outlined today in the House, South Australia has the lowest rate of business start-up on mainland Australia?
Well, I dispute those figures, and I'd be interested to see the ABS stats to that, because that's not my understanding. But I know yesterday that the Deputy Leader moved a privileges motion, and the Speaker made some statements about it applying both to the opposition and the government. Now, the Leader of the Opposition just stated in the House that he claims South Australia had the lowest rate of start-ups in the Federation. Oh, it's not what he said now. Oh, it's changed. It just changed. Like he supports cycling laws but doesn't support cycling laws.
The member for Unley is on his last warning.
Well, we shall see, Mr Speaker. We'll go away and check the Leader of the Opposition's assertions, Mr Speaker. We'll find out. I notice he's the one who's gone white now, sir. He's the one who's gone white, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, we are working through the budget process and reforming our state, reforming our taxes, lowering taxation. But, Mr Speaker, don't believe me, believe the new Federal Treasurer, Scott Morrison. And the first statement he made as our Commonwealth Treasurer in this state was to congratulate the state government on our tax reform package, Mr Speaker. That goes to show the level of commitment of bipartisanship that the new Turnbull government has with the Weatherill government, while members opposite are stuck behind in the Abbott doctrine of divisiveness, opposing and just being negative about South Australia, Mr Speaker.
Those who take points of order against ministers who are debating should come to the point of order with clean hands.
Speaker, I wasn't debating, the Treasurer was.
There was a torrent of interjections from the opposition, interjecting and interrupting the Treasurer, and like an AFL umpire, I decided to let it play.
Well, Speaker, we were only trying to get the Treasurer back to the substance of the question.
Yes, thank you very much for your help. Treasurer.
We're in the fluorescent top anymore, sir. That's very impressive. Going back to the whites. Very good. Mr Speaker.
The Treasurer is warned.
I reject the assertion of the Leader of the Opposition. This state is doing all it can to lower business costs, whether it's through WorkCover or our tax system. We're trying to reduce red tape, and we are working collaboratively with councils to do all we can. And of course, we're also working with the Commonwealth Government. I'd much rather, Mr Speaker, constructive ideas from the opposition rather than the Abbott doctrine of just opposing everything. Perhaps they should embrace Prime Minister Turnbull's newfound optimism for this country and this state rather than Mr Abbott's negativism.
The member for Wright.
Thank you, sir. So my question is to the Minister for Health. Minister, can you inform the House about the important milestones being celebrated by the Australian Craniofacial Unit this year, and how the unit has helped change the lives of countless people here in South Australia, as well as nationally and internationally?